This morning, Congressman Colin Allred of Dallas just back from a trip to Taiwan as tensions there grow with China. Should President Biden, though, respond with force if China attacks Taiwan? And when will Texas start seeing infrastructure money? Those are among our questions for him. The Republican Party of Texas pushing Governor Abbott to call a fourth special session. The party chairman, Matt Rinaldi, is on the program with a prediction about when that will happen. If the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, how will that affect next year's midterm election? And as the Omicron variant spreads, how will Texas leaders respond to it?
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. Let's begin this week with the top political headlines here in Texas. State Senator Larry Taylor is the latest lawmaker to retire from the legislature. Taylor here is leaving after 20 years. He represents Friendswood, League City, Galveston, and among other Southeast Houston suburbs. He also chairs the Senate Education Committee in the Senate Republican Caucus. But Taylor told the Galveston Daily News that he decided to retire rather than fight off a challenge from fellow Republican state rep Mays Middleton. Texas school districts cannot require students to wear face masks. Remember last month a federal judge said they could. Well, a few days ago, the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals put all that on hold as it weighs both sides. It's a confusing situation for school districts, but a case to continue to watch. And Texas Senator Ted Cruz is trying to block President Biden's picks for ambassadors. The Senate has only approved about a dozen of the 80 picks that Biden made. Cruz is slowing it all down, he says, because he's upset with the president for letting Russia sell natural gas to Europe. Democrats, though, say Cruz is just posturing to run for president in 2024 and hampering U.S. foreign policy along the way. Let's start this morning, though, with one of the state's biggest trading partners. It's the island of Taiwan. 7,700 miles across the Pacific, but Texas companies, listen to this, they do $7 billion a year in business with them. The Chinese, though, consider Taiwan a breakaway territory, and many are worrying right now a war could be coming. So while we celebrated Thanksgiving, a bipartisan group from Congress boarded a plane and flew to Taiwan. Among them was Congressman Colin Allred, a Dallas Democrat. Congressman Allred, it's good to see you again. You were on that bipartisan trip to Asia last week, and you met with the president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen. And here's the question, though. Everyone's watching this across the globe. If China does use military force and invades Taiwan, so to speak, should the U.S. respond with military force as well?
Yeah. Well, it was my honor to visit Taiwan and meet with President Tsai. She's incredibly impressive. And I think the people of Taiwan are incredibly impressive. They're a force for good in the world, and they've really handled this pandemic well, and they do a lot of things well, like semiconductor research and production. But our message to China every single day is that this is not the day, and that you do not want to do this. It's not in your interest. It's not in the world's interest, and there will be heavy, heavy consequences if they try and have a forceful reunification with Taiwan. Certainly the folks in Taiwan are able to defend themselves every single time, and really every day. The Chinese invade their airspace and the Taiwanese respond. They scramble their F-16s and they will defend themselves. And we are helping them in that regard. But our message to them is every single day, don't try it today.
And as far as what the president should do if something should happen there in the Pacific, what would you support?
Well, I support democracies against autocracies. And that's really what we're seeing right now in the Pacific. Russia and China are both being very aggressive there, and really also around the world. And Taiwan is a thriving democracy where they have, a great press, where they have, public debates. They deal with a lot of disinformation from the Chinese trying to influence their democracy. And to be honest with you, we can learn a lot from what they do there in terms of countering disinformation in their democracy.
Taiwan, of course, produces a lot of the semiconductors, the chips that go into electronics, the chips that go into cars and trucks. Did you get any indication whether it's going to be cranking up production of those?
They are, and they're also investing, I think it was $18 billion in a facility in Arizona. So they're investing here in the United States. They're actually one of our largest trade partners in the world, despite their small size. And they do the very best chips in the world in terms of the really high-end semiconductor chips. And so they're a vital part of the global economy. And it's really driven by their democracy. What we see around the world is that you're talking about innovation. What does that come from? It comes from having freedom, from having the ability to elect your own representatives, from being able to take a risk and make a mistake maybe in a democratic capitalist system. That's what Taiwan has, and that's also what makes them, I think, so much different from China in many ways. And that's why I think in some ways you see China wanting to incorporate them. It's because of that thriving economy and that thriving democracy.
Congressman, I want to ask you about infrastructure. It was passed and signed into law, as we all know, recently. You've been a big proponent of this, supporting this and trying to get this pushed through, especially for, to benefit your Dallas district here. When do you expect the very first projects might be funded, and what will those be?
I think we'll see this money coming in next year. And it's going to be up to our Council of Governments, our local governments, in terms of how they're going to disseminate that. There's also going to be a lot of grant money that, for example, DART can apply for, but a lot of it's going to go through Austin. The state will be able to, kind of distribute that around, hopefully based on needs and populations, but we can also go directly through those grants. And that's what I'll be supporting with our local folks. We have some real needs, Jason, here in North Texas. We are one of the fastest growing places in the country, period. Not just in Texas. And so we need to have investment in every single area of our infrastructure, whether that's our roads and bridges, which we want to keep up. We already have done a lot on highways, but we want to keep them in good condition. But also, I want to see us expand into public transit because we know that that's going to be increasingly necessary for folks.
Let me ask you about the other big news in D.C. The Supreme Court listening to the Mississippi case about abortion. If the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade, how do you expect that to influence next year's election?
Well, I expect it to influence, women across the state of Texas and across the country. Most importantly, it's something that we've had. It's been a right in this country for a half century, and people have come to expect that in the United States, you will have access to an abortion safely and under the protection of the law. What we know is that this is going to continue, whether or not it's legal in the state of Texas or not. It will become more dangerous. And that's what we've seen in the past before Roe v. Wade, is many women dying, trying to get, oftentimes, whether it's leaving the state or even leaving the country to try and get access to that care. And I think that's not the direction we want to go in. And I think that it's not what Texans support. It's certainly not what the folks in my district support. And we've passed legislation at the federal level to try and enshrine Roe v. Wade into law through the House. It'd be great if we can get it through the Senate, because we actually do have a bipartisan majority in the Senate with even Republican senators saying that they would support doing that. But we just have to get it past the filibuster. And so it may be that we are going to be in a different era in which we have to have legislation to enshrine this instead of a Supreme Court ruling.
All right, Congressman Colin Allred, we appreciate the time. Welcome back after that trip to Asia.
Thanks so much, Jason.
Let's go to court now and talk about two significant decisions affecting Texas. Both of these are temporary ones. The first is the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals telling school districts they cannot require students to wear face masks. And in Austin, a federal judge blocked a new Texas law from going into effect. This is the one that forbids social media companies from kicking users off their platforms because of their viewpoints. Ross Ramsey is watching each of these cases unfold. He's the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune. Ross, good morning to you.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
We're doing well. These decisions were good news and they were bad news for Texas Republicans, Governor Abbott especially, but they're not final decisions by the courts.
Right. And I think we're going to be hearing a lot of news stories through the next few months about this court decided that and the other one decided this. And as you say, they're going to go on up. The Abbott administration wanted to stop school districts from requiring masks. Right now in court, they're getting their way. And like you say, that's going to be appealed. They also wanted to regulate social media companies like Facebook and Twitter and tell them they had to stop moderating or pulling people for immoderate remarks. The court said that basically those companies have the right to do that.
Two cases to continue to watch there. Let's talk about President Biden having to convince Mexico to continue to agree to something he doesn't like, the Remain in Mexico policy. A court told him that he has to do it. How long will this last? What's next for the Biden administration and finally trying to kill this and keep his campaign promise?
Well, I think they've got a couple of things going on. It's a Trump policy. Biden didn't like it. As you said, Texas has this tremendous crush of people trying to get into the United States at its border and has had all year. So they're demanding some kind of action. The Biden administration, because of the court order, began renegotiating the Remain in Mexico policy. It's going to go back into effect. People seeking asylum have to remain in Mexico until they come into the U.S. And I assume the Biden administration is going to try to get it back the way it wants.
Yeah, a lot to watch for the new year. Ross, thanks. Back in a moment to you. Coming up, the Republican Party of Texas Chairman Matt Rinaldi predicting when he thinks a fourth special session will be called and what overturning Roe versus Wade would mean to next year's midterm election. And as Texas politics get more extreme, does that put the state's explosive growth in jeopardy? UT Austin is studying it right now. You're watching Inside Texas Politics. There are growing calls this weekend for Governor Abbott to call a fourth special legislative session. Republicans say there's unfinished business. Specifically, conservatives want to make it illegal for businesses to require workers to get vaccinated. Our next guest, Matt Rinaldi, is the chairman of the Republican Party of Texas, who is also behind this effort. Mr. Chairman, welcome back to our program. Let's talk about this request for a fourth special session. Why is it important, do you think, for the legislature to pass this ban on vaccine mandates if the federal government's going in the opposite direction? Is the whole idea to set up a court fight?
I don't think the federal government is going in the opposite direction. They're doubling down on vaccine mandates. They're having a tough time in court because they're extremely unconstitutional. However, we've seen the Biden administration tell businesses go ahead and implement it, even though we don't have a mandate in place legally. So you're seeing states now try to give their workers the utmost protection by not only issuing executive orders like we have, but putting some teeth behind legislation that gets passed. And now we've seen 2 states completely ban private vaccine mandates. We've seen 8 more states grant very broad exemptions to them.
Governor Abbott's the only one, as you know, who can call a special session of the state legislature. Right. The last thing he said on this that I've seen is he said there was no need to call one now. What do you think it would take for him to change his mind?
I think he's going to in the end. I think it would likely take place in January, if I was just betting on it. I mean, ultimately, you have the federal mandates, many of them going into effect in early January. So you're going to see more and more people become unemployed. This has become a pressing issue for more and more people. We'd like to get ahead of it now, but if we choose to wait, we think that's a mistake, but we'd be happy with a special session that addresses the issue.
Do you think this can be done in 4 days? Explain that process.
Well, Tennessee and Florida did it in about 3 to 5 days each. Called a special session, one bill, passed it. And we've seen bills fly through the legislature before in just a few days. We don't want legislators to have to come back, be away from their family. We know they're tired. They went through a lot this summer. We just want to pass a law that's so very important to pass right now. And we think we can do it quickly.
Mr. Chairman, business groups, as you know, are against a state law like that would ban vaccine mandates. And that's why it didn't get any traction previously as well. What do you tell Texas businesses who oppose this idea?
Well, I think you're misinterpreting a broad-based opposition to vaccine mandate bans like this. I think what businesses are upset about, or what businesses don't want to be, is torn between having to violate a federal law or a mandate and having to violate a state mandate. We see bills like Brian Harrison's bill that doesn't put businesses in that position. So we believe with some time, which we didn't have last time, we can craft a bill that works for businesses, that works for workers, and puts Texas in a better economic position.
Mr. Chairman, Republicans are arguing in this case that medical decisions should be made by the individual and not by the government. A lot of people are hearing Republicans say this, and they're kind of scratching their heads and maybe laughing a little bit because Republicans have fought so hard for years for the government to tell women what they can do with their bodies as well. How do you respond to those people?
Well, the vaccine decision has one person's body involved. The abortion decision has 2 people's bodies involved. So 2 completely different circumstances. I think this is more akin to, should a business be able to force female employees to take birth control? No, they shouldn't. They should not be intimately involved in these private medical decisions.
Finally, on that same topic here too, the Supreme Court could be on the verge of overturning Roe versus Wade. Are you concerned at all, Mr. Chairman, if that happens, that could motivate Democrats to really turn out in the midterm next year?
No, I don't. After the after the 6-week abortion or the heartbeat bill was passed this past legislative session, the press said the same thing. And what happened? We flipped Texas 118. We picked up a Democrat defector who is very, very, very pro-life and supported the heartbeat bill. So the winds at our backs, people want to see the protection of the unborn. People want to see us making progress in the pro-life area, and we're doing so.
Mr. Chairman, we always appreciate your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
For most of the last 20 years, the politics of Texas created an ideal place for businesses to grow. You've probably heard it referred to as the Texas Miracle. But Texas politics are no longer as moderate as they once were. So does that put the state's explosive growth now in jeopardy? It's a question UT Austin is studying, and it's also the focus of our latest episode of Y'all-itics, our political podcast.
Will we continue to march further and further to the right, which, as someone like me who studies cities and urban development, I have concerns about that for lots of reasons. Mostly around competitiveness, so we can put that aside. But that's good. That's an interesting debate about what that looks like going forward. And are we going to be the Texas that has attracted 8.2 million residents in the last 20 years, 40% growth? Are we going to be a Texas that is going to embrace populist conservative politics, which maybe not appealing to the educated, quote unquote, creative class, knowledge-based companies that we have been really pulling in the last decade?
That episode of Y'all-itics is out now. Tuesday, another one we're excited about. Gary Kelly there, the CEO of Southwest Airlines, talks to us from the San Antonio bar where that airline was born. That conversation with Gary Kelly, it drops on Tuesday, so look for Y'all-itics wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, though, this morning on this broadcast, as the Omicron variant spreads, how will Texas leaders respond? Will they respond? Part of our discussion next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross is back with us from the Texas Tribune in Austin. Bud Kennedy is here from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and Bernadine Steptoe is the political producer at WFAA in Dallas. And Ross, will start with you and what seems to be the biggest national headlines going on right now, the Supreme Court considering that Mississippi abortion case. It seems that justices might be poised to overturn Roe versus Wade. The big question as we go into 2022 is how might a decision to overturn Roe v. Wade affect the 2022 midterm elections?
Well, you know, you're going to go into an election where Republicans have been pushing for this for a long time. It's popular with their voters. It's unpopular with Democrats. I think it won't really play in the primaries. But I think as you go into the general election, you know, sometime after this ruling comes down, it could come down anytime between now and midsummer. It could be an issue in the general election, certainly.
Yeah, but it probably wouldn't be an issue in the primaries, but in the general election, does this motivate Democrats or does this just get Republicans excited?
Well, and we'll see whether that makes any difference in the districts, the way the maps are drawn. But there is this bear trap that if the Supreme Court partially overturns Roe, then abortion immediately becomes a second-degree felony in Texas under the law the legislature passed. That means that it might have to be relitigated, and that all might drag into the November election.
If Roe v. Wade is overturned, Bernadine, what do you expect to happen?
Well, as Ross said, I expect for us to see more activity in the general. But keep in mind, this abortion issue is just not for Democrats. You also have some Republican women who view it as a pro-choice issue. Now, the lines have been drawn differently, but I think in the general election, and also it's going to be how the pro-abortion advocates or people message this particular issue. Because I heard from the GOP chair that now you're looking at two people. So they're already gearing up for their messaging, but I always say the Democrats need to improve their messaging.
Yeah, not just on this issue, but a number of issues. I think the Democrats will probably even agree with that. But let me ask about the Omicron variant spreading across the United States. Even more cities are reporting cases now, too. A lot of confusion about boosters. It seems to be just muddying up again as we go through this. Are states and counties in Texas at least not getting the word out for this new variant?
You know, it's a real treacherous situation right now in Texas. We've got 16 million people who've been vaccinated, but only 3 million who've had a booster. Everybody needs to have a booster. Everybody, if it's been more than 6 months, then you need to have a booster if you're over 18. And it's not mandatory, but it's recommended. It's getting more, the variant's getting more dangerous. The counties and states, if you look at the county websites about where you get information, it's all still the original information about where to get a vaccination. It doesn't have any information about boosters hardly. It's hard to find. People need to go out now and go to your supermarket and get a booster.
Ross, at least 30 to 40% of Texans remain unvaccinated. Do you expect that we're going to hear from Texas leaders on this Omicron variant, likely the second of many to come?
I think we might. You know, the thing about Omicron is that there's so much that's unknown. So far, the cases in South Africa have been milder. They don't know whether this variant will crowd out the problematic Delta variant that's given us so much trouble. And it's not recorded in Texas yet. It's in a handful of states. We expect it to get here. Once it gets here, if it's serious, then I think you'll get the kind of response maybe that you're talking about. Yeah, fortunately, it hasn't been reported here, too. Bernadine, what do you expect Texas leaders might do? Do you think we'll hear from Governor Abbott on this when those first cases happen
if it gets worse. Remember, the Republicans don't necessarily want to deal with the different variants and the virus. But as Ross said, and I keep agreeing with Ross for this segment, but it's unknown. Yeah. They don't know a lot about it, and it hasn't reached all the states. So they're sort of waiting to see how effective and the impact it will have. And I think that once we see that, then they must come out and deal with it.
All right. Sounds good, guys. Thank you so much, Bernadine. We appreciate it. Bud, Ross, thank you very much. Thank you for watching as well. We're back again next Sunday to take you inside Texas politics and hope you can join us then. Take care.